Welcome to the Above and Beyond Recovery Podcast, where we explore recovery and its relationship to faith, family, work, community, and health.
Hello, I'm Amber Didden, today's host of the Above and Beyond Recovery Podcast. On today's episode, we'll be talking about the therapeutic journey. What is it like to enter and walk through care, and how can those experiences be different from person to person? Our guest today is Greg McFarland. As many of you know, this show is produced by Pennsylvania Adult and Teen Challenge, and Greg is our director of the Philadelphia Adult and Teen Challenge location. He's also a licensed professional counselor and certified advanced alcohol and drug counselor. Greg, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Amber, and I'm very excited to be here. This is a topic I'm very passionate about and have been for many years.
So Greg, let's just start by, could you just give us a brief overview of who you are and your story and what brought you to Pennsylvania Adult and Teen Challenge?
So to go back in a long ways in history, what actually brought me to Pennsylvania Adult and Teen Challenge is I went through the program in 2008. I came from Wisconsin to come out here to do the program. And after I completed the program, I started going to college. Shortly after starting college, I was in about my junior year. I ended up coming back here to be an assistant counselor, and that was in 2011. And I've worked in a lot of different roles with Pennsylvania Adult and Teen Challenge, everything from being an assistant counselor, clinical supervisor. I work in quality assurance. I've worked with the Philadelphia Adult and Teen Challenge Center with the ladies out there. And I've done some other various roles throughout the process. And so doing this podcast, I developed a really strong desire for the therapeutic experience that a client would have throughout the program. And it's something that I've always enjoyed seeing is when the response to that experience has been one of reception and one of transformation for that individual. And I think it keeps me motivated in everything that I do.
So we're talking today about the therapeutic journey. And the thing that I'm so excited about on this topic is we've covered a little bit of each phase of care and each stage, the different programs that are available, both in our programs and outside of our programs. But for someone who, I myself have never been through treatment, but I've seen lots of people go through treatment. There's an element of compassion that comes when you understand that person's journey and what it's actually like. And we have a lot of listeners who are family members of people in recovery or are community members or church members who haven't experienced addiction or treatment themselves, but maybe want some more insight into what that pathway is like, or for someone who might be considering treatment, maybe what they can expect. So I'm looking forward to getting into that with you. Let's start with entering treatment. You can kind of talk a little bit about what treatment was like for you personally, but then just kind of the typical experience that someone might find getting themselves into a program.
Well, what's interesting is treatment really starts before they even enter our doors. It starts with the phone call with one of our admission specialists. And so entering treatment for every individual is different. Some come because they have to for court reasons or because they're about to get kicked out of their home or for, various other reasons. Others come because they've realized they've hit rock bottom in their addiction and they just want to be through with it. They don't want to have to use a substance every day to feel normal or to feel okay. And so they come in with this strong desire to come off of it. But I think every person, even if they've been in treatment before, comes wondering, what's next? What is it? And each level of care is a little bit different too, because if somebody's entering into our detox program, in the back of their mind, they're thinking, how uncomfortable might this be? Are they going to take care of me? Am I going to get my needs met? What's going to happen next? And, for those individuals, the way that we interact with them might be different than someone who's coming into a short-term or outpatient program. Short-term is a lot like the first day of school. They're either detoxed or they've kind of finished that detox process. And they're coming in wondering, who's my counselor going to be? What's going to happen next? Am I going to get along with people there? What's my roommate going to be like? I mean, there's a lot of things that correlate with any change in your living environment. But the other thing I think everybody wonders is, how's this going to work? Is my life going to change? Some people wonder, what is this going to cost me? When we're living in addiction, we have relationships in that addiction. We may have roles in that addiction about who we are. Some people deal and sell drugs. And they may have to leave that life behind, which is leaving the way that they've made money for years behind. Some people may be leaving a relationship where the other person uses drugs, and they know in the back of their mind, this relationship isn't going to work if I get clean. And so there's some challenging thoughts for individuals coming in, thoughts that cause them to really think about, am I ready to give this stuff up? And the hope is through the process they would grow into that. But it's what's next? What am I going to have to give up? What is this going to mean for me to go through this process of transformation and change?
I can imagine that would be so overwhelming, just processing through all of those questions and trying to come up with answers and solutions. And like you said, counting those costs and weighing those outcomes.
Yeah.
Can we rewind just a little bit to detox? Can you tell me what are some physical symptoms or things that someone might be anticipating going into a detox length of stay?
So for someone coming into detox, you have the withdrawal symptoms. And the withdrawal symptoms can be achiness, sweating, vomiting, stomach issues and stuff like that. And really what it's doing is the body is going back to a state of not being reliant on that chemical. And as a result of that, the body's going through this very hard reaction. If you've ever seen someone go through the process, you know that it's like having a really serious flu. It's very flu-like symptoms, from the fever and the other stuff. And so they're wondering if they've been through it before and they know what comes with withdrawal. They're wondering, is Pennsylvania Adult and Teen Challenge, or is this program going to help me not feel this way? And our goal is to obviously help them not feel that way, but also give them the emotional and spiritual needs that they have as well. That level of compassion towards where they're at in this process in the very beginning stages. And a lot of times that might be fear, trepidation, worry about what's next, worry about, everything they left behind to enter the doors of Pennsylvania Adult and Teen Challenge.
Right. So what does that treatment process look like in detox? Can you tell me a little bit of a day in the life of a detox patient?
So a day in the life is mainly, for the most people, in the first probably 2 days. A lot of times it's sleeping. The drug life, it can be very, very taxing on the body. And so they may be running, 18 hours a day, because once they have their drugs, they're still trying to find the next use or the next amount of drugs. So the first 2 days might be rest, and then the compassion and engagement from our staff and our pastoral team, connecting with them and just saying, I'm here, we care about you, how can we support you? And then other people in the community might also be supporting them. If they're really struggling, just kind of encouraging them that they can get through it, that they'll be okay, offering them things if they need them and stuff like that. But then after that, we start trying to engage them more. The earlier that we can get them motivated towards the treatment process, the better. So they may be encouraged to attend an optional group or an optional, meeting or something like that. And when these individuals go, because they're what we call so fresh, they're just brand new into this treatment process, they're right out of the streets, they have the chance to kind of go through this cathartic or this unloading process in group or with a staff member, where they kind of get to share their story. And there's a powerful thing that happens in that moment when someone gets to share their story, when someone gets to have an open and compassionate ear to hear all that they've been through to bring them through that process. And then to hear an encouraging and uplifting word from them about, making change in their life, about experiencing change. And many of our staff are in recovery. We have many stories we can share with them of people who have had a lot of success in the process, and that can be really encouraging for them. So the goal really for that individual, or the experience for that individual, from, I guess, our perspective for each, is that we would instill hope as early as possible. We would instill hope through each minor interaction we have, taking care of their physical needs, but then when they actually spend time with us, that we would instill hope in what their future can look like if they stick to the process and encourage them through it. Because it can be very hard for someone to, especially when they're going through those symptoms, to say, if this is what it feels like, why do I want to keep doing it? You know, because they're so used to having that kind of go-to substance to make them feel better. And when they hear stories of life and transformation for people, it's very easy for them to say, well, I want that. And for some people, that's what's got them through the whole year-long program, is that desire for life change, that desire to share in the testimony with someone else of the change they experienced.
So I know everybody's different and everyone's going to come into treatment at a different level of motivation, but what would you say, how often are people kind of moving more towards or receptive towards recovery in the detox process? Do most people get there by the end of their detox day?
I would say a lot of them do. What's funny is I just ran a report on this, and of the people who transfer within our program from detox to short-term is about 65%. But that's not, taking into account how many of the individuals in our detox program go into other programs.
Right.
So I think it would be safe to say it's close to like 75% go on to another level of care. So I think that's the better part of the group, is going into other levels of care, whether with us or with someone else. But for those individuals, I think many of them are hitting rock bottom or are hitting a place of desperation before they come in, which increases their motivation to go through the program, to do the work, to change. The issue most times, at least in my experience, and I worked in detox specifically for about a year, and what I saw is it wasn't about whether or not they came in with motivation, because pain is a great motivator.
Right.
Suffering and struggle are great motivators. It's keeping that motivation through the process. It's them not losing the motivation. Once they feel better, get their energy back, get their strength back, they start thinking, I'm all better now. I can go and get a job now. And it's like, we know as professionals that detox isn't enough. It's a part of our continuum of care. So we want to see them go on. So it's about keeping that motivation. It's about encouraging them to stay humble through the process and to keep focused on the long-term goal of not only just getting the strength back, but learning the skills and developing the ability to walk out a long-term life of recovery.
And not to go too far off track, but I mean, that's a concept that I think people who aren't in recovery can apply too. I know in my own life, when I'm going through a rough time and I reach out to the Lord and I'm like, God, I need you. And then I start feeling better.
Yep.
I'm like, okay, God, thanks so much. I'll see you again next time.
Yeah.
It's easy for us to kind of put in the work and then start feeling better and kind of bail out before the real change starts to take place. So what are the treatment goals for detox, and how do you know when someone is kind of like achieved those goals and ready to move on to the next step?
So the treatment goals are really to sustain motivation, to stabilize physically, and to stabilize mentally. So when they come in, they may not have been on their normal medications for a long time. So that could mean mentally or physically, they're out of sync with where they should be. So we try to get them stabilized physically. We try to get them stabilized mentally. So we get them back on whatever medications they might need, or we get them to a place where they're thinking clearly again and they're kind of behaving within this normal range of functioning. And then we try to keep them motivated. And if those three things can kind of work with synergy, we can then get them into the next level of care, prepared for the engagement that they're going to have at that place. And so from our end, a lot of that comes through, that motivation comes through compassion. Our ability to listen to them, our ability to love them and encourage them. And on a side note, I can't tell you how many people 6, 7, 8 months in the program would say to me, I'm here because of a nurse that loved me, that encouraged me, that sat with me and just said, you're going to make it and you're going to do this. And that is just an amazing thing that months later, when they were sick, when they were struggling, when they barely had enough motivation to get out of bed, someone showed them love, and it stayed with them 6 months, a year later, and it's part of their story now for the rest of their life, this person who shared compassion and love with them through the process.
It's powerful. And that's something that family members, friends, pastors that are from their home communities could also be supporting them, especially in those transition times between detox and short-term, or short-term and long-term. Like, hey, you can do this. I'm on the phone with you and I'm cheering you on, and hang in there. It makes a big difference.
Yeah, absolutely. Support is every piece of it is a very powerful thing in someone's recovery.
So talk to me about short-term. What does that part of the journey look like?
So short-term has I would say, a little bit more intense therapeutic engagement. So the hope is they're coming in stable and they're kind of ready to engage, but they also have all of life kind of that they've been through in this addiction process, all of the broken relationships, all of the pain, and a lot of the regret, and a lot of the different things that might come with life and addiction. And so when someone comes over into short term, we use a couple different therapeutic approaches. One is in the group process, we call it YLOM, therapeutic approach. And what that is, it's a psychotherapeutic approach, which means that they kind of freely share and kind of freely open up in the group process. And the counselor directs that open share with the rest of the group to build up that individual and to help them begin to see their life in a new way. And the new way is through these therapeutic factors, through these different lenses that help them see their thoughts, see their behaviors, and see their past life in a new lens. And through that, they kind of automatically start making adjustments in their life, because the connection is made between their thoughts, their beliefs, their past, and the changes that they need to make. And then there's this group that's coming together and encouraging them to make those changes and adjustments. And that happens every day. Every day there's a group. It's about 2 hours long. And every day they're working with this group of people to make those life changes and to make those thinking changes. And then the other approaches that we use would be like cognitive behavioral therapy. And when someone's in the short-term program, there's a lot of problem thinking that's developed. And they may not want this problem thinking, but it could be thinking of self-defeat. I'll never amount to anything. I'll always be a drug addict. Or it may be these behavior patterns that they haven't learned to overcome. Like we talked about the late night eating. You get a craving for a bad behavior, you get a craving for doing something, and then you pursue it. Well, what cognitive behavior therapy does is it gives us the opportunity to help them reshape the way they see those behaviors. It may be with anger, it may be with depression, it may be with a spiritual component. Some people feel like, God doesn't love me, he doesn't want me. And what cognitive behavior therapy does as a tool is it allows that counselor to help that person challenge those thoughts, challenge those behaviors. And as they do that, they can begin to reshape the way they see situations, reshape the way they respond to impulses, and eventually change their behavior as a whole. And then as they walk out those new behaviors and carry out those new thoughts, it becomes a part of who they are instead of the kind of problem behaviors. And it's really, when you combine those two things, the group therapy and what they're doing and getting encouragement for, and then what's happening with the counselor, what you see is this transformation, and can see is this transformation of the whole person. But another component of that is that they're going from, most of them, unstructured ways of living to structured ways of living. So now they're developing a routine of getting up in the morning, going to breakfast, getting their medication, going to group, and having to be on time and go through that kind of cycle of structured living helps develop healthy habits for them for their next level or their next step. They're able to get physically well. And physical exercise, the discipline of that, feeling better in your body, all plays a huge role in how well they do overall in treatment and moving forward. And then there's the spiritual component where we have different chapel services, we have pastors that'll meet with them, and so they're able to develop themselves spiritually. And throughout the Bible, we are reminded to transform our mind, to change our thinking, to take off these old patterns of behaviors and to put on new patterns of behavior. And so in the spiritual part of what we do, we are helping them transform their thinking from a very worldly and a very self-centered pattern of thinking into this spiritual, biblical pattern of thinking, where they have a framework then for how they can see the world, for how they can adjust their behaviors. And the pastoral staff, the staff here, is all helping them, walking with them as they implement that into their life. And we get to see a lot of long-term change as a result of that.
So there are a lot of advantages to inpatient treatment. We talked about a couple of them. But one of the things that I think is interesting is when someone's in inpatient treatment or residential treatment, they're not exposed to the same kind of triggers that they would be at home. So what are some of the opportunities that patients have to practice some of the tools that they're learning while they're in inpatient treatment? Because they're not at home, they're not able to apply it to a situation they might find at home, but what are some of the situations they experience in treatment where they can start practicing those things?
So when we're working with an individual, there is still a lot of temptation. What's interesting about addiction is that when you tell stories about addiction, or when you go through a memory of you kind of using a substance or doing a behavior, your brain begins to release the same chemicals that it would release if it uses that substance. And what that does on the brain side of things is it triggers you to go out and use. So individuals may not necessarily have exposure to the substance on site, but they still have exposure to triggers. We call them war stories is one of them. And that can be a huge trigger for someone to sit around with other people and tell stories about how they got high, what they don't realize. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, I don't know a ton about neurobiology, but I have heard the example before that when you build these pathways, you're kind of like plowing kind of like these pathways through your brain. And it sounds like what you're saying is even just that thinking is kind of plowing that rut a little bit deeper. Even if you're not actually going through with the behavior, recounting some of those stories can keep plowing that and keep enforcing that connection. Is that kind of what
That's exactly what I'm saying. And so what that individual is then encouraged to do with their counselor, and this is one of many behaviors or things that could be triggering or could be just a problem behavior pattern, is that they're encouraged to use tools. And one of the tools we use is mindfulness. And mindfulness is being present in the moment. It may be like kind of second nature to tell a war story because you're so used to telling stories from your past that it's easy to get into a group of people. So we're teaching them to be present in the moment, to be aware of their behavior patterns, to be aware of their thinking, and then to stop that war story and not continue with it. And we're encouraging them to do that with any triggers they might have. These may be if they have a dream about using drugs, or if they start having cravings where their brain just cycles through the desire to use drugs. We get them present in the moment, and we get them processing in a new way that trigger and that experience, and then making decisions to help work against that. That may be healthy activities like using the gym or working out or talking to a counselor or a pastor or someone else. It might be using other things like art and crafts and engaging in new behaviors to get away from that thing. So what all those do for an individual in that program and all throughout is it gives them the tools and the discipline to work against triggers. And the more that they can do that when they re-enter the community, if they've developed that ability to redirect and to adjust their behaviors and not to stay focused, when they are triggered, they already have the tools ready to go to work against that trigger. And the mindfulness helps them to be aware that they are triggered. Sometimes people can be triggered and not be aware that they're triggered. They just feel very uncomfortable. Well, that discomfort is guiding them back to what they used to feel comfortable, which was substances. But we teach them to be aware of that discomfort, to know the risk that it plays in a relapse or into tempting them. And then we work with them to develop the skills not to. So that's kind of how they're triggered. And it may seem like they don't have a lot of triggers in the program because they're away from it all, but they do. There's social triggers, there's emotional triggers, there's family triggers. Some people, after a week or two in treatment, they get a phone call saying your car was repossessed, or you have a new charge in the court system, or anything. Any of those could be very large triggers for them. And so the counselor is there to then support them in dealing with it in a very different way than they're used to.
Well, Greg, this has been so great. We have so much more to talk about, so we can't wait to cover it in part 2. We hope that you'll join us for that episode.
Thank you for joining us. The Above and Beyond Recovery podcast is a production of Pennsylvania Adult and Teen Challenge. If you or a loved one needs help with addiction, call us now at 844-888-8085 or find us online at paatc.org. That information is also in our show notes. Join us next time as we continue the conversation.